Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session today. I'm Colleen Leung, co-founder of Unmute. We're a mental health platform that focuses on helping marginalized communities unmute about their mental health and match to the right therapist. Prior to co-founding Unmute, I was actually working for a Boston-based startup. And so I recall those early days of interviewing with a ton of different companies, struggling maintaining a healthy mindset, life balance, and from all the rejections and worse, or even worse, getting ghosted by these companies. So I know how real the struggle is in changing our mindset for the job search game. And I'm super excited to moderate this conversation with Sam and Catherine. Sam is the co-founder and CEO of On Practice, and Catherine is a coach and founder of Look Within Leadership. The two are actually longtime friends. They've known each other for over 10 years. We just found that out recently. So I'll kick it off to them for introductions before we dive into the conversation. Sam, do you want to go first?
Sure. And hi, everyone. Make sure to say hello in chat. I know it's sometimes a little quiet at the start, but we want to see who you are because we can then make sure we're answering questions that speak to what you guys want to hear. I am Sam Takeff. I'm the co-founder of On Practice. We're a live online yoga, meditation, and wellness startup based here in Massachusetts. We have about 100 classes a week on our public schedule with teachers all over the country and all over the world. And I do a little bit of everything in my day job. And I think a lot about mindset, wellness. It's my passion, and ended up building a business around it. So that's who I am. And I have a very cute French bulldog named Bertram who is going to be snoring. Hopefully it won't be too loud as we go on.
Awesome. I'm Catherine Yazzie. I am
Love it. Catherine.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine. I am the coach and founder at Look Within Leadership. I do one-on-one and group programs around leadership development, leadership coaching, and some consulting through that as well. And before I started my business last year during the pandemic, I spent almost a decade at different Boston startups. I was at Hotspot for 5 years, a company called Zayas, and most recently at Toast, and did a variety of customer-facing roles and leadership roles within customer success and support. And personally, mindset has been a huge piece of my own personal development and growth, especially over the last few years. And I've dug into it, done therapy, done coaching, done all the things. And so I'm just super excited to be here and share the things that I've learned and gone through my own to hopefully help you all in your journey.
Great. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Catherine. So just as a quick reminder, please submit your Q&As throughout the conversation in the chat box. I think someone just submitted. Thanks, Charlie, for that. And so let's get started. Before we jump into how we focus on ourselves and our mental health during the job search process, I really wanted to talk about how the process of job hunting for startups can be different than applying for other jobs. So Sam, what's different about it? And how do you creatively even land an interview in the startup world?
Yeah, it is tough. I didn't give any of my background. So I started my tech career in startups almost 15 years ago. I was out in San Francisco. I was managing a bookstore, so not tech whatsoever, and then ended up an early team member at Square. That interview process was insane. It was also not a normal one. So I did not submit a resume or an application to a job that was posted. And I actually have never submitted a resume or application to a job that's posted and gotten a job that way. It's all been more creative than that, which I think there's pros and cons. But and then ended up here in the Boston area, ended up working at Runkeeper, leading globalization, doing a little bit of every job. I think in startups, there's a couple things that you do differently than applying to, say, a corporate job. One, you really have to look at the company and the team and understand that unless you're applying for senior roles, sometimes you just have to get your foot in the door. Catherine and I both started in support, which is always an incredibly challenging but incredibly rewarding place to start your startup career. And then it also, there's a lot of networking. Y'all are here at this, so I think you are in tune to the fact that it is all about the people. The community here is small. everybody knows each other, and it is really finding yourself your first place or your first right fit so that you can get to know people, build your network, etc. I think I spoke around your question, but Catherine, maybe you want to add to it.
No, I think you're spot on, and I think the point I want to call attention to is it really depends on the stage of the company. I know when Sam and I were doing Startup Institute way back in 2012, there were a lot of really small startups. Like I'm talking 4, 5, 6 people total on the team, and I remember going to have coffee and meeting people, and it was almost as if like. Sometimes it was just that informational networking event, and sometimes it felt like they were really interviewing me. So I think you have to be prepared to like kind of navigate those situations. Some people want to hire someone right away. Others want to really get to know you as a person and spend time with you. And then as you get into sort of the mid and late stage startup scale up companies, they're going to have more of a formal process. You can go through recruiters. So I think it's just really understanding what kind of what stage company do you want to join, and like what's going to be best for you at the stage of career that you're at. So for instance, when I graduated from Startup Institute, I had about 1 year of job experience, and I knew that I wanted to go somewhere where maybe it was a little bit more established, where I could really learn a lot and build a foundation before going to a really small startup. And everyone's story is different, but for me, that's kind of how I thought about it. And that really impacted how I approached the job search. I tried to go through referrals, through people I had met within the company to point me in the right direction and get some information about the process. And I think that's one thing that's amazing, especially about Boston and the startup community here, is that everyone is so willing to help and use your connections, use your network. They're going to be able to give you those insights around, who's the hiring manager, what's the process like, and be able to answer your questions before you go into a formal process. And I would just really recommend that too for anyone listening. It's use all the resources you have. Don't just go in blind if you can help it. And everyone's super friendly and super willing to help.
Love it. Love it. And so, Catherine, like when you do actually land that interview, sometimes you hear that you're not a good fit for the role, or worse, you don't ever hear back from them. And so how do you take this negative feedback, spin it around to something positive? And what do you personally do to stay mentally healthy when you're listening to all this negative feedback?
Yeah, I think this is such an important question, because one thing I think is that this experience is universal. Talk to anyone that you know in their career, and everyone has experienced failure. Everyone has not been called back for a job or been turned down for a role, but we don't always talk about it, and we don't always speak about, what happens when this happens. And how to deal with it and how to move on. And so for me, it totally, took going through this experience a couple of times to learn what worked for me. And like, I know at the beginning of my career, it felt like it stung really hard, right? It's never fun to experience this. But the older I've gotten and the more experience I've had, I think the way that I've learned to reframe it is if they didn't think I was a good fit, like there was something that either wasn't a fit with the company, whether it's the organizational values, like there's something that they didn't recognize within me. And I think for me, that's the most important thing, is like, I want to go somewhere where people are excited about having me on their team and I'm excited about them. And I think something we don't always consider is that like the interview process is just as much us feeling out a company as it is the company deciding if we're going to be a good fit for them too. So if they saw something that they didn't think would work out, or they didn't recognize, the value that I bring to the table, then like, why would I want to work in that place? And like, it doesn't mean that they're bad people. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It just means that it's not the right fit. And I think for me, that's been huge, to be able to kind of separate myself from the rejection and say, this doesn't judge me at all. It's just the situation. And in every single case, it sounds really corny, but like every time you get rejected, it really does redirect you to that next thing. And the more you like prepare, I remember interviews at the beginning of my career, just feeling super nervous, and it was really intimidating. But every time I did it, I got a little bit better and a little bit better. So when I finally did land that job at HubSpot, I remember just feeling like, wow, everything I've gone through to get here helped me get here. And I learned so much through this process about myself, about what I wanted in a role. And so I think you just have to look at it that way. It's like, it's all just information, it's experience. You learned something, and keep going. There's so many different jobs out there. You're going to find something. You're going to find that team that really sees something in you, and you're going to be pumped to work there too. And that's really what you want. You don't want to be like showing up to that interview just trying to prove that you fit in there. You want to really feel like they see you for who you are. They see your value. And that's going to be that opportunity. That's like the hell yes opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it seems like, Catherine, you're mentioning something about like finding the right cultural fit, right? Like we're also interviewing the employer themselves. And so, Sam, I kind of wanted to ask and turn this question towards you. How do you do that in a virtual world? I mean, I know like we're slowly emerging from COVID, going back to offices, but I think for the rest of this year, we're probably still going to be online. And so how do you look for the right culture over a Zoom call and find the right fit for yourself?
I think one of the nice things about going through a really challenging year in this 2021 where we are now, it used to be that when you were doing sort of remote job searching, we've been a remote first company since we started our company. There was always this anxiety around Zoom or around doing a remote meeting. I think now what we see is that in the past year, absolutely everyone across every age group in every industry has had to take a Zoom call to do their jobs, to live their lives, and to function. So I think because of that paradigm shift, I actually think now is not a bad time to be doing this type of thing on Zoom, because we've had a year and a half of absolutely everyone practicing building relationships and having real conversation with people on Zoom. That said, I always like to look beyond just your video call, and I would do this just in interviews in person as well. I look at, the people I'm meeting with. Who are they? Where are they? Where do they come from? I will look at their Twitter. I will look at, I'll see if I know people who know them. And I think gathering that kind of information as you're prepping yourself for an interview is just invaluable. On the flip side, so this is not with interviewing folks, but we've had to build our business completely remotely with people across the country. And we've done the same thing. It's really about focusing on relationship building and not the platform or technology. It's certainly easier to take people out to coffee and build a relationship that way where you see them. But honestly, I think the world is just going towards this. Even in the future where we are able to meet in person, the nice thing about Zoom is, one, it allows us to bring in people from all over the country. It allows us to bring in, to have conversations with people we would not have access to otherwise. And that's going to make hiring more inclusive in general. So, it is challenging, but I think there's a lot of positives to it, to be honest. And you only have to spend 10 minutes getting prepared for an in-person.
That's true.
Rather than like planning for the parking. And I honestly, one of my most horrifying moments I ended up doing, I was going on an interview right when I had just first got my puppy 6 years ago now. And I remember nothing about the interview other than it being a little bit traumatic, but I was so anxious about the other stuff in my life going on. I had to go downtown. I had to get parking. I was worried that he was going to get out of his crate, which he definitely did. I came back from the interview and there was a dog outside of the crate waiting for me. Now with Zoom, you don't have to do that. You can prepare, you can gather yourself, you can get the mindset shift, and just before you get on the call, which is kind of great.
Yeah, that is. Love it. And sometimes like the waiting for the interview in the waiting room is more anxiety inducing, and like maybe you can do something more mindful, right, before you step onto the screen for Zoom. We do have some questions. So a follow-up question. Joseph is actually interested, Catherine, in why you left HubSpot and Toast.
Yeah, so when I left HubSpot, I was there for almost 5 years, and I had maybe 5 or 6 jobs over that time. HubSpot grew tremendously quickly while I was there, and I saw it go from like a 500-person company to an IPO to a global company. I actually got to spend time in the Australia office for a little while. And I felt like at that point, I had gone from answering the phones and support to managing a team. And I was like, okay, I'm kind of ready to push myself into the next phase of my career. And because I had done Startup Institute, I honestly had this goal of mine to join a smaller company. I really recognized I don't really feel ready to jump in and be like the only marketer or the only customer person at a startup. But by that time, after 5 years at HubSpot, after going through so many ups and downs, after growing so much as a person and professionally, I really felt that pull to start to look outside and to start to like think about what I wanted to do next, what I could do and take my skills to a smaller company and have that experience. So that's really why I decided to make that transition. And I did go to a startup that was 50 people for about 13 months. And then when I joined Toast, with the pandemic, that was kind of what caused me. I was unfortunately a part of the layoff that reduced 50% of the company just really in just a matter of weeks because of the pandemic. And again, it was one of those moments where I had to look within myself and do a lot of that reflection of, okay, I've had all these amazing career experiences. I've learned so much. What do I want to do? How can I make an impact and do what I love? And really that was sort of, the decision was made for me, but I really felt deep down that it was pushing me towards this path of starting my own thing. And again, taking on that next challenge. So that's kind of the background.
That's wonderful. So inspiring. And another question in the chat. I think this one would be great for you, Sam, as a co-founder and CEO of On Practice. So Debashri is from New York and is curious about what working at a startup would be like.
That is a great question. I think every startup is going to be different. Working at startups for me, I grew up with sort of entrepreneurial parents, grandparents. I only knew sort of the chaos of working for yourself or at a startup, as opposed to, I think, the stability or perceived stability, let's say that, reframe it that way, of working at a more established company. One of the best parts about working at a startup, and Catherine, I think you touched on this, is that you have the ability to learn and grow so much more quickly than you would in an established company. The sort of cons of that is that you are learning and growing often by doing something yourself for the first time that there is no one to help you through. So there's a lot of scary learning and not a lot of processes or bureaucracy that you can look to. Sometimes that is great. Other times it's challenging. It is an opportunity to grow in different roles. So Catherine mentioned this for sure at HubSpot. For me, definitely was the case at Runkeeper, where I think I wore maybe 6 or 7 hats over my tenure at Runkeeper and got to do so many different things. Every startup I've worked in also has had some level of transparency and open meetings that is awesome, where you can say, oh, I want to learn about this. Let's just go ask the salesperson if I can sit in and listen in on something or participate. Or at Runkeeper, I got to do a little bit of account management and help build a data team. And at one point, I ended up leading the systems team, even though I'm not an engineer. So there is great opportunity. And if you are ready to leap and make that sort of it feels risky. I don't think it's inherently more risky in most startups unless you're in a like 4 or 5 person startup. I think it's an awesome thing to do, and I really encourage it to anyone. And it is always easier to join a startup now. Before you have more commitments in your life, and now is wherever you are now. If you're 25, if you're 55, now is now. The longer you wait, the harder it gets. And so I have gotten so much out of my life in taking this leap and going down this path. And I think it's an awesome way to start or continue a career.
Definitely. Yeah. Thanks, Sam. And then we have a question from Ina. I think this might be great for you, Catherine, especially you shared about your laid off at Toast. I actually got laid off during COVID as well from a Boston-based startup as well during COVID. So Ina asks, how do you explain gaps due to a layoff during an interview, especially if it's been over 3 months? The market is so competitive right now.
Yeah, I think I saw something on LinkedIn, a discussion around this, and I think that the route I've taken and would recommend is just to be honest about, being part of a layoff. And again, it really requires you being able to tell that story and acknowledge, like, hey, this had nothing, especially with COVID, like, this has nothing to do. People understand it's not, in an overwhelming amount of cases, it doesn't mean that you are a poor performer. It doesn't mean that there was anything wrong with what you were doing. It's genuinely, we've all gone through such a huge monumental change this year with the pandemic, and that has caused so much uncertainty within businesses, and they've had to make these really hard decisions. And I think being honest and explaining, and even if you've taken the time in the last few months in this gap, like it's totally okay to say I've taken some time for myself to really think about what I wanted to do. I went through this layoff. Like, that's a really big experience. It's something I know when it happened to me, it took me a few weeks to really grieve. It's such a big part of my life. And losing your job, it's shocking. It's really something that, especially when it comes out of left field, or if it doesn't, it's still really hard, and it's hard to go through. And I think hopefully, if anything, as we move into this new phase of building a new normal for ourselves, I hope we can all bring more empathy. And I think for the most part, the people you talk to, hopefully that they acknowledge that and they have empathy for you. And I guarantee you're not the first person they've spoken to who's been through a layoff in the last 18 months. And if they have a problem with a 3-month gap, like, that's when you ask yourself, do I really want to work with someone who's going to take that as like more valuable than my skills, who I am as a person, what I know I can bring to this company? And for me, that's always going to be a no. It's like, I want to work with people who understand at our core, we're human beings. We're not just here to work 80 hours a week. We are people. We have feelings. We have to deal with things going on in our world. And the pandemic was a big thing. And a layoff is a big thing to process too. So people, I believe, like, the right people are going to not see it as a problem. I think it's our job to show up confident, tell our career narrative, be honest and truthful. And again, that's what we can control. We can't control how it's going to be received, but the right people, the people who have heart and empathy, are not going to view that as a strike, in my opinion.
Right. And those are the companies we want to work for. Yeah.
Exactly.
I just want to underscore, I think what you said around career narrative is so important. Beyond layoffs, we're not, no one is perfect, right? People don't go and have great, perfect career paths. You have a winding trail of career path, and almost everybody I know does. I don't know anybody anymore who has worked for the same company for however many years. And so owning that story, and also, if there's parts of your story that you don't like for some reason, doing some of the work to reframe it in your own mind. And that's beyond layoffs. I mean, a lot of people are fired from jobs. That's not, hopefully you're not fired for cause for doing something really egregious, but just because it didn't work out. And that does not mean that you didn't work out and that you were the person who didn't work out. It is, maybe this was not the right time for you in a particular place in the learning trajectory or in the growth of the company. It was just not a right fit. And so the more that we can do sort of that work of reframing the stories in our own head, the better that we show up and tell that story, not just in interviews, but sort of in all aspects of your career. And so focusing on that story is really important. And then just the other thing I would add to that is this is such a universal truth. It is so important that you don't feel that you are alone. I mean, most people feel immediately after this type of thing that you're alone. Some of my best startup relationships have been not with my coworkers at the time of working with them, but after we have worked together or after we
Right.
have programs together. And so finding and developing your network and not just, I hate the word network, but your friends in startups is so important, because these are all things that we go through and we will go through throughout our careers. You just never know what it's going to look like. And the more that we can talk about these things, the better for everyone. So.
Right. That's so true. So I got laid off during the beginning of COVID too, and ended up starting Unmute, bringing on some of my coworkers from my previous company as well, and just like the bond is even stronger. And we all, you kind of go through this experience together, getting laid off, working together, and it was an amazing environment, and then getting laid off together and grieving that together. And so we're all still very interconnected today. So yeah, that's very true. Just turning the conversation back into changing our mindset and prioritizing our mental health during the process. So job searching, we all know it's a full-time job in itself. And while you're already working a job, it's very difficult to balance life. And I remember when I was applying for jobs, I was very tunnel vision, like I need to land next job, has to be the right one. And then everything else in my life was secondary in terms of priority. And that's obviously not very healthy in terms of a mindset. So, Catherine, how do you balance the job search process and your personal life?
Yeah, and I think it's so real, because I think so often we what you were saying, Colleen, about just like that pressure we feel to find that next job, to make that move, and it's so valid, because our career is how we sustain ourselves. It's like it's tapping into that survival instinct, and like that's something that can bring up a lot of anxiety for people. And I think the idea of how do we strike that balance takes practice, to be able to kind of step back from that and say, okay, this is something that's really important to me. I want to work towards this. Here's my plan. Here's the steps I'm taking. But how am I like supporting myself and caring for myself outside of these things that I'm doing to take action and to move things forward? And I think right now, especially when a lot of us are applying for jobs or having these interviews like remotely, it can be tricky. It can be easy to just get sucked into like waiting by your computer or your phone for that email. And I think it's so important to like schedule time for yourself outside of just waiting for that next thing, because a lot of it is in your control, but a lot of it is not. And so I guess I would just recommend, like, think about what activities are going to make you feel good and bring you joy, and make sure that you're prioritizing that just as much as you're prioritizing sending thank you emails, updating your resume, going through LinkedIn, because you need to take care of yourself, and you need to have that time for self-care. And a lot of times, like, that's going to really those restorative activities are going to help you come back to the job search process or show up to that interview feeling really calm and at your best, versus showing up stressed and frazzled. And really, again, I think that's what we want. That's what you want to feel. You want to feel confident. You want to feel calm when you're going through that process. And so taking that time, and sometimes that can seem really counterintuitive. It can seem scary to kind of walk away from it for a little while and take those breaks. But at least for me, I know that is crucial. And I almost consider that part of my job now, is like scheduling in the fun, scheduling in the relaxation, because I know it's all part of the process, and it's helping me show up better for my clients, helping me show up better for my business. And I know Sam probably has a ton of great tips too. So I want to make sure she has a little bit of time to add stuff in too.
I'll take up right where you left off. I think that switching this process over to thinking about it as a system, as opposed to I'm going to apply to a job and then I'm going to wait. I'm going to apply to a job and wait, which is how I think most people start there, right? That's like we right. Sort of apply, wait. The more that we can think about it as a whole system. So how do I structure my time? So one, I'm scheduling times that I'm going to do the work of job searching, and then I'm also going to rest. Scheduling times that batching things. So this is something that we do. I do this in my day-to-day job work, but I think it works for all aspects of your life. The more that you can do sort of group together the same type of brainwave activities, the better. So instead of writing the cover letter once, it's like, okay, well, can you set up time to make the list of not just the 4 places that you're going to apply, but what if I was to start by making the list of all of the places I could conceivably want to work? Don't edit the list. Start there. And then how do I make sure to set time to edit my cover letter and send it to like 10 places instead of 1 place and then wait and then the next place? The other thing I like to think around time boxing is, how do I do this with other people? Because again, going back to this, you're not alone in this process. I have a weekly co-working session with friends and acquaintances, not my actual coworkers. And that has been a great time for people to work on job search activities together, because there's usually like 2 or 3 people. We just had the PhDs all working on their job hunt together. You don't have to do this alone. And it's also really, I think it's just really helpful for me as a person to be working on the same types of activities when I know other people are working on the same types of activities. Even if we're not working on them together, there's a little bit of this like brain synergy woo thing that's happening when we all are working on something that requires the same mental energy. So that would be my other quick one there. But just going back, the last thing there, rest. I can't, part of this is just a pep talk for myself because I am not great at it. But the more that you can practice rest and also giving yourself like an end point to things. If you go about job searching and you think like, okay, I'm going to just do this indefinitely, it's so overwhelming. Mm-hmm. If you can give yourself the same sort of workflow that startups use, which is usually this sprint model. You spend a couple of weeks, you start working on tasks, and then you have an endpoint, you reflect, you rest, and then you start again. It's a much easier way to run any sort of project or process.
Right. No, I love that sprint mentality. And it's just, that's so healthy so that you're not just sticking around and waiting for that job, to formulate or, manifest it in some ways. That balance is key. So we do have a question from Diane. It's a specific question, so I'll just throw it to both of you if either of you know. Who are the recruiters that specialize in startups? If you know of any.
I'm trying to think. I feel like I've seen a bunch on LinkedIn, but like
I, as a job hunter, I think you're going to probably have to ask around. I think it really depends on the stage you are as a job hunter. I will say in startups, you see less external recruiting than you would in larger companies. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I think honestly, your best recruiter is going to be somebody, regardless of who it is. It's somebody who is highly connected to lots of startups, and you can vet that by seeing where they've placed other people. So you're going to have to do a little bit of a hunt. But it is really helpful to have a recruiter on your side. But that said, startups, especially in Boston, the ones that have recruiters, it's actually not that hard to get in touch with them directly. That's actually how I ended up, at least at Runkeeper, getting a role there. It wasn't necessarily a job ad. It was reaching out directly to the recruiters at the company and saying, hey, even if you don't have a role for me now, can we have a conversation? And do you know people who are hiring? That's also, even if a recruiter is not hiring themselves, they have their 10 friends who are at other startups who they know have jobs for you. So they're great folks to reach out to.
Yeah, and I'd echo that because when I joined HubSpot after Startup Institute, it was a LinkedIn message to a recruiter who I met during Startup Institute and said, "Hey, this is my resume. I just graduated from Startup Institute. I'm looking for a role." And she connected me with the right, customer support or success recruiter at the time. So the in-house folks, again, they're just as helpful as anyone else you're going to meet in recruiting, and they have that in. They know who's the right person you should speak to. And yeah, they're so well connected. Boston's small, people in tech all know each other. And so just to +1 Sam's point is like, don't be afraid to ask those questions and just make those connections, get to know people. And that's going to really help you make more connections and just kind of see what else is out there.
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Super tangible insights and feedback. I know we're coming up soon. We have about 9 minutes left, but just wanted to kind of wrap things up on the last question around motivation. So, applying for jobs, getting rejected, getting negative feedback is emotionally draining. So, both Sam and Catherine, how do you keep yourself motivated during this process and this stage?
I'm gonna go first. So for me, what I have kind of relied on over the years is I like to go back to sort of what intrinsically motivates me. And for me, that's like spending time with my values and spending time reflecting on, like, when I think about work and I think about what are those days that I end the day and just feel so like lit up and so fulfilled and happy that I've really made an impact, and like keep coming back to that over and over again. Like, what were those moments? What was I doing? How does that relate to my values? And just like using that as a compass almost of what are these things that I stand for and really care about, and use that to motivate me. And again, kind of keeping that mindset of like, there's people out there who care about these same things. I just need to meet them. And the more I'm like conscious of that, the easier it's going to be to like communicate that to other people, and also discern, is this environment actually a match for my values? Is it going to be a place where I'm going to be able to do my best work? And so for me, I think just coming back to myself over and over and over again and trying to separate, what happened externally, and just reminding myself of, I have talents, I have skills, I know I've made a difference in the past. I get so excited about these things. I know I can bring a lot of value, and like, it's, how can I just keep finding those people, finding those opportunities to contribute, and using that. And again, it's like, my business is Look Within Leadership. It's really the biggest thing that I've learned over the last 5 years, especially, is just like, how can we use those things within ourselves to help guide us? And I think that's incredibly motivating when we can connect to that and use that as our guide.
I think that's spot on. The values piece is really important because, especially as you look in startups, you will not necessarily be looking at one particular type of job in one particular type of company. So you're going to be looking at a spectrum of jobs across all different industries, with the sort of unique thing being that, okay, they're all startups. And so the more that you can do that sort of self-inquiry around what really matters to you, what kind of people do you want to be spending your time with, who do you want to be serving, that kind of work, which, starting with journaling, it always feels a little like, oh, just start a journal, but that type of work is something that you can use and develop over a lifetime, and it is so important. For me, the two other things are, I have to focus sort of back onto these cornerstone habits for myself. If I am not taking care of, honestly, my movement, like, if I don't have planned walks, I'm going to sit on my couch and I'm never going to leave. If I don't focus on my meal planning, I won't feed myself to give myself the energy to do the things I want to do and get through a job search. So really focusing on what are the small habits in your life that you can control when everything else feels like you can't, is something that I go back to again and again. I recommend to anybody doing a job search. And sort of the last thing that I'll just add is getting outside of yourself, focusing on other people during your day and during your week and during your life. For me, that is volunteering some of my time. It's finding the nonprofits that are doing work that really matters to me. When I can step in and help someone else, that always lessens the pain of the focus on the scary things and the hard things that are happening in my life. And that's just something that's going to serve you not just in the job search, but sort of in the rest of your life, in your career, wherever you are. the more that you can help other people, I think the energy comes back to you, and the more that you'll find yourself able to help yourself. Plus, honestly, I cannot tell you how many people I know have found jobs in startups by meeting somebody at some sort of volunteering event. Just because you never know. It's not just the people that you're going to talk to, the recruiters, etc. You never know who you meet in life, even within your own friends and acquaintances, who might be the connection to that next job or sale or whatever it is. So I like starting there.
Great. Thank you, Sam and Catherine, so much for your knowledge and your experience. Incredibly insightful conversation today. So thank you both. I'll turn it back to you, Haley.
Thank you so much.